state.
All right, I just started recording. Today is today's a special day. It's the 20th podcast that we have done. So I think we're going to talk about what we've learned in the last 20 episodes, or I guess 19 episodes leading up to this one, about making a podcast.
That is, in fact, the topic at hand. And it seems like every week we kind of throw off the cuff what we're going to talk about. And I think for the big 2-0, that's what we're going to go with. Yeah. Full disclosure, though, the first thing I learned about this podcast is for 20 weeks, committing to more or less a 7 a.m. start has been tough. And I got to give Hack credit because I've missed 3 of them by oversleeping. And I feel like that's what I want to start this morning off, because that happened today. I was just like, oh my God, what? Oh, we have to do this thing that I personally committed to my friend, and my word is bond.
Well, let's talk about okay, I just want to talk about some of my key learnings. So we just did this exercise where we kind of brainstormed for like 5 minutes what our personal key learnings were, and jumping off on what Steven just said about us committing to 7 a.m. every morning for most Wednesdays for the last 20 weeks. One of my major learnings was that having an accountability buddy helps a lot. And it isn't that Steven was there to hold my hand the entire time, or I was there to hold Steven's time, but I often find that the activation energy to get started is the hardest part. And sometimes when you have an accountability buddy, they give you just that little amount of energy to activate. Like once I get out of bed at 7 a.m., I'm like wiping crust out of my eyes, and then I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe that I'm waking up. But it just takes like the fact that I know Steven's waiting at his computer, just to get my ass to the computer. Once we start, once the ball's rolling, it's already rolling, and you're just gonna get it done regardless. So I think accountability buddies are super important. They're not there to hold your hand, absolutely not, but they are there to, get you to take 2 steps towards where you need to go. And once you take those first 2 steps, then you're already there.
Yeah, no, I love that. Activation energy is such a good word. I think the first time I heard it was in high school chemistry. And I think it's just such a great concept, right? Used throughout. So I think that's spot on. And I think to add to that, what's interesting about accountability, and we did an episode on procrastination, right? We also did an episode on anxiety. And I think one of the prevailing thoughts nowadays when people talk about procrastination is that it's actually like a function of anxiety. Like that's what causes a lot of people to procrastinate. And I think as far as accountability goes, you have to think about like who is the best accountability for you, right? Like and I think what's really great about our format is that, we're friends, and I know like Hack is by far one of the least judgmental people. And so there's like accountability, but there's not like, I think in my mind, this like kind of fixation or creation of like, oh my God, like, it's not obviously the same relationship that you have like your boss or something like that, or someone you didn't know as well. And so, yeah, I totally vibe with that. And I think that's what kind of I was thinking about when we were doing our pre 5-minute reflection was, what it means to endeavor to go to do like this, a creative self-improvement type of exercise and commit to that with like a friend. And what did that accountability ultimately look like for us, right? Like, I think every time you and I, Hack, we linked on this pod, we were just like, how formal is it? How not informal of it? How much do we care about the audience? How much is it for us? And I think every artist, like this is art, right? It's a creative endeavor, like has those questions. So I don't know. I pose those because I think those ones are as the evolution of this continues, it will always kind of like modulate between, right? You know, sometimes we think about our audience, sometimes we think about just us, sometimes we're thinking about just ourselves, sometimes we're thinking about like both of us, you know. And so it's interesting. And I'll close with this. I'm self-admittedly someone who likes to like just go off on my own, right? Like oftentimes it's like I trust very much and appreciate like the speed of being able to kind of do things. And you know, what's the next thing above one, right? It's two. And so this has been interesting. And people have all sorts of aphorisms for like, you know, how partnership works in various forms. And no, it's been cool. Yeah.
You know, so I think when you were talking about procrastination, and people having anxiety, and a lot of times that's what it takes to get them started. You know, it's like one and the same in a way. Like you have anxiety, so you have procrastination, so you don't get started. And when you're talking about, you know, us doing the podcast and we don't know who the audience is for, what we're going to talk about, you know, like all these things that we feel like we have to know in order to just get started. Like the first 10 episodes or 15, maybe we didn't even have a working title. And we kind of have a title now. I mean, I don't even know if it's a title we're going to keep forever. But we have, but it took us probably 15 episodes to come to that conclusion. But had we been like, hey, we need to get a title, we needed to know exactly what we're going to talk about. We need to know, you know, the topics every single day for us to even get started. Then we never would have even gotten started. I think there's like an idea that it has to be perfect or perfect, like, you know, it has to be perfect for you to get started. But for sure, one of the key learnings is that it just needs to be enough to get started. And in fact, it shouldn't be perfect, because you learn so much while in motion that if you don't initiate the motion in the first place, then you lose out on a lot of the learnings, and you might never even get started in the first place. If the activation energy to get started is like, I need to know exactly what we're talking about, Steven and I need to be on the same page, we need to, you know, have all this stuff ironed out, then honestly, we probably never would have started, in my opinion. So I think activity in motion, or learning while in motion, is very important, especially for something like this. I mean, we could make 100 of these episodes and they can all be like shitty, but we would learn a lot more, you know, just getting those reps in, rather than, you know, trying to spend like a year planning out the first one down to the T.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and you know, you could argue that that path almost reveals a lot more that you could never even anticipate, right? Like, uh, you know, given two paths, and don't get us wrong, right? I think the ultimate goal, like in all things, is to strike the perfect balance. You know, we always talk about like what's the right amount of structure. But yeah, but kind of like struggling through it almost develops also the muscle of how to struggle through things, right? And to kind of parse through like the thing you're actually looking for, the thing that resonates, like, yeah, let's go that way. Like that's the way we should go, right? And so you get good at even just filtering through chaos quickly, making a decision, saying, let's go that way. And yeah, I think that's such an important point that, I mean, we can't, especially in this day and age, we can't be reminded enough, especially that like things are so public, and it almost feels like anything, like, you know, we put these podcasts out there, and it's really funny because it's a very real thing to feel, at least for me, right? That, oh my God, we put that podcast out there. Like that is now, like we've made an unretractable step toward identity. Like people are going to see it, like it's public, it's out there. We had a chance to like put it out there, and we put this like kind of half-hearted version. But now you look at it, there's a catalog of 20. Like there's no one of that like actually represents like the pod. And if we had in fact cared about like who saw it and what they thought of it, like let's say like, some media person we really like, looked up to came and checked it out. Man, there's just like that's a decent amount of volume. Each podcast about an hour, right? And again, none of this stuff sticks, right? Like we kind of get this fixed idea that like this stuff is gonna stick to me, and it's like this black, like this like mark. None of this stuff sticks. It's just ego is totally arbitrary. Like identity is totally arbitrary, and your self-image is totally arbitrary. Like change it however you want. People forget, move, like just continue to like refine and transform, right? And I think that in some sense, right, like this podcast is now its own like kind of meta identity around and a life of its own. And we'll see how it grows up, right? See how it starts to change. And like you said, we could even change the name. Maybe we could go to like 100 episodes or something, swap the entire thing, and people are like, what the hell? But who knows?
One thing I've learned while doing this podcast on a personal level, another thing is sometimes like when me and you are just having a conversation, like I can, especially like if I know it's not going to be in a podcast, I can be extremely open with what I'm going to say, whether it's PC or not, I know we can be extremely candid with one another. But when it's a podcast and I know there might be somebody else listening at some point later in the future, even though, we only have like 7 subscribers and I'm pretty sure 2 of those are me and you, somebody might listen to it and it just like, it forces me to like, kind of like tone it down a little bit, watch it, just to keep it somewhat PC, so I don't know, man, man, I completely lost my train of thought. But pulling it back to making it PC, it takes it changes it a little bit, but it changes it enough sometimes where it's just like, damn it, why couldn't I have just said that? I don't know if that's good or bad, but it kind of is what it is. I guess the nature of doing something like this. I know you're saying not anyone is gonna see it. I mean, there might be 5 other people based on the subscribers right now that would see it, and I'm pretty sure all 5 of those people, maybe one person might watch it. It's probably Mitten, but
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know what point I was trying to make.
No, I mean that's a good that's a good subtopic for sure. And a bit of a contentious one. I'm gonna put that disclaimer out there, at least where my mind tends to go, especially in today's climate. But I personally am a huge proponent of that ladder of public living, just trying to like push yourself, stretch a little bit always to the next rung of inviting a little bit more openness into everything that you live and do. And I think that's, in many ways, that's kind of the point almost like of something like this, right? That that's how you find your voice. I think that we have plenty of forums, right? Where we are talking privately. So it's not like we're missing that per se. Now, I think this is the active transformation into a public voice. And whatever that voice is kind of how we find it. And I think that's true for everybody, really, honestly. Now, I think the interesting thing about also, if you kind of unpack the hesitation, I think sometimes in saying or not saying certain things in a quote unquote public forum is like, what is the nature of speech and conversation, right? Maybe just between 2 people, but then what happens if it becomes like viral in its own sense and becomes embedded in culture? which is why I think that there's a lot of, I understand it, why there's a lot of like speech policing now, and canceling, and like kind of really interrogating and digging up what has been said, just because people know the power of words now. But it's almost though like, it almost feels though that like with every powerful tool, the potential for misuse like can't be reason enough alone to kind of restrict or govern it in totality, because then you also cut off like the good stuff, right? And maybe we're just kind of going oscillating, and there's going to be a rebalancing of the force. But I think we're really, really stuck right now on how words can be damaging and bad. They certainly can be, don't get me wrong, but we're also losing out on, I think, also the value of just free, open speech, where you can say the wrong thing and the consequences won't be so bad, so dire. So, I'm an optimist. I think like it'll probably, hopefully it swings back a little bit, and it's important for people to, I think, collectively appreciate the power of words. That's going to be a net good, hopefully. Because that's also one of the fundamental themes of our podcast that will probably hit over and over and over and over and over again. It's just like, words, what are they? Have you really even thought about what you're doing when you start like using words? So
I forget who said this, but I recently consumed some content, and somebody made a point that they were saying that they absolutely think we are going to rebalance from like this cancel culture back to something to the middle. And the reason being, if you think about the way people are growing up today, digital identity today is so much more of a thing than it was when we were growing up. Or I'm 4 years older than you, but more so when I was growing up, definitely more so. More so when you were growing up, and definitely more so when I was growing up. Like when we were like 18, 19, 20, like, when we were like immature teenagers, and I'm sure we probably said some like dumb shit when we were teenagers. We didn't have a TikTok to post it to. We didn't have a Twitter or any of that stuff that the kids nowadays have to like kind of like post it to. I think I might have had like a Zanga or something like that. But we didn't have the medium to record ourselves saying dumb shit. And so if you think about it, when these kids that are like, 15, 16, 17 today, when they become like adults, when they're like in their early 30s and stuff, and the dumb shit that they said is probably plastered all over the internet in a way that they can't erase it. And so basically, like, the cancel culture of, let's say, Gen Z, eventually they're gonna have to be like, oh shit, like, if we accept that the worst thing anyone has ever said is it's the thing that they'll get judged on, then they have to apply that lens to themselves too at some point. And imagine how the side effect of that. I think I forget who said it, but it was around the conversation. Are you familiar with what happened with John Gruden?
no, Gruden got taken down.
Yeah, so for those that don't know, John Gruden is he's an NFL coach. He coached the Raiders like a long time ago, and then he came back to coaching the Raiders. I think he had $100 million contract or something like that, coaching the Las Vegas Raiders. And he's like a pretty well-known NFL coach. But then an email came out from like 2010. He said some like pretty. He said some pretty like racist shit in the email. I think it was referring to. It was like referring to. It must have been like I think it was like the president of like the NFL Labor Players Association or something at the time. It was this black dude, and then he referred to the guy's lips. He said they were like as big as tires or something like that in like this private email. And then it came out, and this email was obviously from like it was like 10 years ago. So that email came out, and then I think a few days after that email, he resigned. I'm sure, you know, obviously there's a lot of um, controversy for a few days, and then he resigned. And you know, obviously he definitely shouldn't have said any of the shit he said. But I think the conversation around that, you could see it was like, it wasn't just like everyone. I mean, I'm sure there was a lot of people, you know, saying, yo, he needs to resign, all that stuff. And eventually he did. But there was also people saying, hey, like, um, you know, like if you have to judge somebody based on the worst thing they've ever said, then, you know, that's what you're gonna, you know, get sometimes. And why would you want to judge somebody based on the worst thing that they've ever said? And so it was at least refreshing. I mean, it was refreshing to hear that there was at least another side that wasn't like it wasn't just like automatic, yo, you have to, like, this guy has to resign. I mean, there was a lot of that, but there was also like a voice that was saying, hey, listen, like if you judge somebody based on the worst thing they've ever said, imagine like this generation going forward, you know, the younger generation, like everything is like on social media, like somewhere, then you're gonna have to apply this lens to Gen Z as they get older too. And I don't know, people aren't gonna like that if, you know, if it applies to them later.
Yeah, I would I would bet on that. I mean, there's no stronger force than being subjected to your own rules, right? To the own effects. And I mean, it wouldn't be the first time America went through this type of like kind of, I hesitate to use which loaded words here. But you know, there's a period, right? For example, the Red Scare, where people were being actively blacklisted, some completely off the mark, right? Like I could just fake it. My point is like not whether or not it was true or not that this person, or that people were faking things, but that, you know, society had this like you know, really big cleaver and would be fast exit, like pretty much like, you know, lop off anyone who thought was suspected to be not worth it. So yeah, I think that's gonna have to be the case. And I think even when our generation, millennials start to take office more, right? Like, can you imagine? I mean, you know, it's starting to happen slowly. Millennials, the oldest millennials are like 40 something, maybe 41 right now, 40, 41. Start to take office more, or positions of power. We still have a track record. I mean, there's still stuff for us, even though that we weren't fully grown in it. So I think that we might have to be actually, as much as I would love to be like, all right, Gen Z, you're going to be the one that has to like feel the hurt, self-inflicted hurt, and then change the game. Like, I think it might fall on us to change the game, once we realize that everyone has something. I mean, if like, if it's coming out to this degree for folks that are a generation above us, and that's just like kind of like more analog manual stuff, like an email or something, it's going to happen. Well, you said like even just 10 years ago. So, and I know I'm going to come put myself out there. Like, I have a funny personal anecdote where, uh, yeah, man, growing up, right? And especially for us where, you know, I was just talking to your brother about this the other day. Like there was like a pre-internet, right? Before Google had indexed everything, and before major corporations had gotten the internet, where, you know, right now when you go to the internet, you like click an app open, or you always go through the portal of one, right? And if you go through Google, sites are indexed, SEO ranked. Like there's this early stage of the internet where you had to know like the actual domain. You have to remember it, like remembering a friend's phone number. Like if you didn't remember a friend's number, you're not talking to your friend, right? Here, if you didn't remember that website name, uh, and you didn't share it with your friend, he wouldn't get it. Like, and there was so much learning in that period, especially being like, you know, an adolescent during that period, and in gaming too, flaming when like I think when the first time people really started to do online gaming, people said some fucked up shit like on forums and on games. And I remember one time, like, man, you gotta fight to survive. And I started to like learn how to say like bad things to people that I'm competing with. And I think the logs were somewhere. And one day my dad found them and he printed them out. And he was flabbergasted. It was some mess, like it was like violence. So I was like, yo, you know, I'm gonna like, and it was like, and he took me aside. He's like, do you know who wrote this?
It's like it
He's
was
like,
Kim.
yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, it's Kim, right? My younger sister, and it's funny. Oh man, if Kim was on this pod, she would also volunteer some of her own stuff. Like little girls can be savage, by the way, especially within groups of little girls. I had a conversation with her about that too. But yeah, you know what? It's funny, and I didn't own up to it. I was like, Dad, I have no idea where that came from. Like, I was like, I don't know. That's something from the internet. Like, people are bad up there. But I was the one that wrote it, and it's just like, holy crap. And if that, I think that even though I have like, that was like 20 years ago, even my vague recollection of it, if anyone actually read that, I would, I would be just totally mortified. Like, there's some stuff there. So
Yeah,
anyway,
I mean, the thing is, like, okay, so I mean,
kids.
anyone, not even just kids, anyone that's played video games before,
Oh my
especially
gosh.
actually, especially once like Xbox Live started, um, you know how you play Call of Duty and like when you kill someone, you can say some shit into the mic,
Yeah.
and then they hear you for like I don't know how it works now, but you can definitely talk shit through the mic. And anyone that plays video games understands the culture around like around that. It just devolves into like the sometimes the worst thing you can say to the person, like in a video game situation when people are getting heated, is the thing that ends up getting said. And obviously in that type of setting, you don't take that very seriously because you understand the person is anonymous, and like why would you take what like a 13-year-old kid said to you seriously on there? But then because of the fact that it's anonymous, the fact that no one's taking it seriously, people just say some shit. But imagine if any of that shit got out for anybody. I mean, there's been like NBA players like I think like Myers Leonard, or I think there was a NASCAR guy. They're just playing video games on Twitch, and then they're streaming it because these guys are like obviously like celebrities and stuff. But then I think that instinct, like for when you're playing video games, and you just get into this mindset of, oh, nothing I say is uh everything I say is anonymous, basically, because I'm sure it is most of the time when they're playing. Well, except when you're streaming to like 100,000 people, and they say some shit like Miles Leonard. I think called someone. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this word. Whatever. I think Miles Leonard called someone a kike or something like
Oh
that.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
obviously, I'm sure he said it because he didn't know what it meant. He probably just heard it somewhere, because he probably never would have intentionally said that on a Twitch stream. But then he got canceled for that. I think he lost his NBA contract for a little bit. He's doing rounds through the Jewish community to like to fix or to like at least like repair or make right what he can. And I think he turned it around. But I mean he was. I mean, he definitely like lost his NBA contract and stuff like that for a little while. Um, I think some NASCAR guy dropped the N word or something like that. I mean, obviously that uh, definitely wasn't ideal. But yeah, man, going back to like the whole um, I don't know, as things get more digital and stuff like this, and you can trace everything back to who said it. The lens by which everyone gets judged needs to be something that everyone can agree on, not just like, okay, well, if I'm not the one that said it, then I need to, I want to be able to cancel this guy. But then if I say it, then yeah, once you start putting video games in the mix, a lot of people probably say some shit. And a lot of people play video games. I mean, luckily I don't play too many more video games nowadays, but um
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because in my mind, sometimes I feel like I might take things for granted, right? In my personal experience that don't necessarily map outward, and aren't as accessible. And as we started going into this subtopic, uh, I think video games is one of those big cultural divides. Like I think if you understand and grew up in the culture online community around video games, it's such a gap, almost a canyon between you and this other person who hasn't, right? In terms of like, how could you convey or that understanding? And I don't want to get it wrong too. Like there are like video games is actually in the communities that were born out of it. I think, and the social dynamics are actually something I'm very passionate about and I hold very dearly. Like I think there's actually really beautiful, amazing, like authentic human relationships that happen in gaming. Um, and so again, it goes back to like, I think with every new technological advancement, like I think we almost over index on the bad, the negative consequences, intended or otherwise. And it almost becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy or a negative feedback loop, if you will, right? Like I think we all kind of just start moving towards that direction. And this reminds me of, gosh, a lot of jumping off points there, but I recently watched this like Hank Green video, if you've heard of him, on the recent Facebook scandal, and the stuff that's happening in that space. And we've talked about social media. I think that's just if you think about like what online gaming was when we were growing up, you could almost maybe make an analogy that like social media for the younger generation is similar. And he just says straight up, like, and he brings back like all the different forms of media that came out when they came out. It's like, it's still so new to us. Like we're just gonna be really bad at it. Like it's, in the grand scheme of things, it's gonna be still new for such a long time. And of course we're gonna just suck as a group. But yeah, I think I kind of also lost my point there, but there's like, how can we steer the ship right, I guess is what I'll close on, right? Like how do we objectively, and there's a lot of biases here, right? And a lot of prejudices about what has happened in the space. Like it's turned, like all social things, like there's nothing more messy than social relationships, right? At any level, like humans are messy. And so how do we take a step back and steer that right? Because there's something there, right? Like for human advancement, and how do we? I like your idea, your story too, of that NBA player, because it seems like it was a redemptive story, right? He turned it back, right? And we should hold people accountable, right? We should aspire, like have a standard, but could we agree, right? Like if we collectively came together and said, and we just close our eyes, it's like, all right, people, like we should hold ourselves to a higher standard, even at the individual level, for how we speak and conduct ourselves in private spaces, right, behind closed doors, because that matters, right? It matters. But what would it look like to redeem yourself through that, right? Because I think a lot of people, all the folks now who are canceled, who have been canceled or actively canceling, they say like, you got to do the work, right? And like people get canceled, comes like, I'm doing the work. Like I got to I know I got to do the work. Like, but no one actually defines what the work is. Like, is it just reading a bunch of Wikipedia articles, documentaries, textbooks? Like, so, is it going around and meeting actual members and sitting down? It's probably all of the above, but it almost has to be like, I think, more of an explicit path, right? Like for like, okay, so is this person redeemed now? Like, are they good now? But it has to be there. Like it has to be accessible, right? It has to be a funnel that we put people through so that they can be, redeemed. If they, are like fucking racist or misogynistic or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
No, I agree with that. I think the rules of the game have to be something that you like. You have to imagine, like, okay, imagine the worst shit that you said, as a teenager, or 10 years ago, or 5 years, like whatever the worst shit you said then was, whether through email or even in a personal conversation that maybe got recorded somehow, something like that. Like imagine the worst shit that you've said. Now imagine that got out there, and like what I mean, seriously, this is a horrible thought experiment. Depending on the type of person you are and the shit that you say. I know for me, you probably get canceled like right away. But now imagine the worst shit you said 10 or 15 years ago, and you're so much like of a different person now. But imagine that got out there. Imagine what the rules of the game should be for someone like yourself. And then you have to imagine, like let's say we're all like, let's say I'm not hacking, you're not Steven. Like, what are the rules of the game that makes it better for the greater good for everybody if we all posted like the worst shit that we said 10 years ago somewhere where everyone can read it? What would that look like? What you know what I mean? Because like you can't pick rules based on your own biases. Like, for instance, if I've never said anything bad before, then of course I'm gonna be like, all right, well, I want max punishment for anyone that said like this, and this. But I think the only way to like look at it is, okay, let's say we're all like anonymous people and we just got into this game. What do we want those rules to look like for if everybody, you know, that says something like really bad, you know, 10 or 15 years ago, and it somehow like got resurfaced, what is the redemption arc for that? And you know, I don't know if people will be like, well, there shouldn't be a redemption arc from that. There shouldn't be a way for them to get out of that. They should have never had said that in the first place. Well, of course they shouldn't have, but they did say it. So what do the rules of the game look like? Because what's going to end up happening is, you know, 5 or 10 years from now, when you start looking back at the Zoomer generation or like the older millennials, like when there's a much easier way to access a lot of the information that is being said, like because there's more social media, there's more like there's gonna have to be rules that makes it okay for the worst shit someone, not the worst shit, but you know, some bad shit for that has gotten out. The culture, I think it's like a pendulum. It just like the technology is new, so obviously a lot of the stuff like that comes out, people are like, oh shit, I can't believe anyone would even say something like that. But then it's gonna be like, oh wait, like, you know, and I think it's gonna come back closer to the middle. I don't know if we want to talk about Dave Chappelle, but I mean, this last couple of weeks, I mean, his special dropped too, and he almost got canceled. I actually don't think he was close to getting canceled, but they were talking about it for a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a natural jumping point. And I definitely, what's funny is that I think I thought of Dave Chappelle maybe when you were speaking 3 jumps ago, but then I lost it, and I had to just kind of park that somewhere. But just jumping off your latest point here, and it is kind of funny how we started this podcast with like, hey, you know, what did we think about the last 20 episodes? Then it kind of went into like, well, yeah, this is the most public thing we've ever done, ever, like in terms of actually putting our voices out there. So that is always a funny thing. And I think to me, a part of this is also, I also believe kind of like that you have a moral obligation to curate your part of the world with what you have available to you, right? So that other people can benefit, you know, other people around, but also below, like, you know, also on that earlier in that journey can benefit. And I think that, you know, for certain, everyone has kind of like a resilience built in with the way that they've lived their life. Dave Chappelle probably has enormous resilience by virtue of being like one of the greatest of all time in comedy. But we also have our own, right? And I think that we have kind of like a moral obligation to try to always bring our our own perspective forward, radical participation, right? To cite some Burning Man lingo, and kind of bring that balance. And that's it's almost like the only way balance can actually be achieved. Sometimes I think about, right? I think like in all these systems, you know, my mental model is that like balance comes from more inputs almost, right? Counterbalancing inputs. And this is a bit of a hard tangent, and we don't have to keep going down this. You know, I think let's be explicit about divergence. We don't have to go down this path, but I think what's super interesting to me personally I have a very, very broad brush for spirituality, but I was raised Catholic, and I more or less have a Eurocentric, upbringing. That I think so many of the questions that you posed just now, which were really great questions, are actually just answered in the Bible. And it's just so funny to me because I think everyone, at least no matter who you are, would I think accept that religion has some bearing and utility in answering some of those questions for people over millennia. And Jesus says things like, and by the way, I'm not by no means a Christian. I wouldn't call myself one, or even advocate, or trying to but little sayings that stick with you, right? Because you heard him in church one day. It's like, I think someone was about to get messed up by the group, and he says let who hasn't committed any sin throw the first stone, and everyone's like, oh crap, everyone has sinned, right? And then people make fun of this a lot, but one of the things in Christianity, or at least Jesus New Testament, is when you've done something wrong, all you got to do is in your heart say, ask for forgiveness, and God will give it to you, right? It's like the redemption path is always there, just people won't take it. It's that easy. Hey, just say, just really apologize, and God will forgive you, and you'll be good. And it's there, it's just right there for you. But we just why can't we just do that? And I think this idea that only God can judge is another saying that people always say, oh, only God can judge. People do this thing. And then what is the last thing I wanted to say? But yeah, I don't know. I think that there's some interesting bits in religions out there, to make sure that we don't self-cannibalize. We are not, I don't think we're good at being our own judges, right? Any system that's expected to police itself, it's just not going to be good for various reasons. And going back to the procrastination anxiety thing, I think a lot of people suffer from procrastination anxieties because they serve to function as their own judge, right? Using maybe some negative words and sayings that they've downloaded over the years, you're lazy, whatever. But it's just, again, it's not feasible to judge to police yourself. And that's why it's really great, the accountability piece, to have something external to you that you can answer to, right? That way you don't have to beat yourself up. You can trust that this other thing will correct you. You can have faith in that thing, guiding you. Otherwise you just get all messed up. So anyway, we can go back to Dave Chappelle. Which is an interesting one. Remember we kept saying I'm gonna talk about Dave Chappelle. We should talk about Dave Chappelle, and Dave Chappelle's up now.
No, Dave Chappelle. We don't have to talk about Chappelle. I think, okay, so the religion thing is interesting. And I'll just do a bullet point, and then maybe we can, if we want to keep going down that path, we can, but we don't have to. I think a lot of times with spirituality books, I'm more familiar with the spirituality books that are not the Bible, but I assume the Bible probably has some pretty good shit in there, because it's the #1 book of all time. I don't know why I've never tried to read the Bible. Probably just my upbringing as a Catholic as well. I'm just I'm not gonna read that shit. I think a lot of times words are just words until you have experience, and then the words actually make sense. My most direct experience with that realization is sometimes I read these spirituality books, like Eckhart Tolle's books, some Michael Singer books, just a few books, or even listening to Alan Watts lectures and stuff like that. And then I look back to when I first read the book, let's say 10 years ago. I read The Power of Now and A New Earth both like about 8 to 10 years ago, in that range. And I've read them both at least 2 times since then, probably like, 3 to 4 years apart each time. And dude, just like the 3 year, like you read the book once and you're like, all right, none of this stuff makes that much sense, but I guess, it's kind of an interesting read. 90% of it doesn't make any sense to me, but the 10% was interesting enough that I read the book. But then like after 4 years and your lens has changed after the words have already like gotten into you, and then you reread the book and then half of it makes much more sense. You're like, holy shit, that's what he was talking about. And then 3 or 4 years later, you read the book again and you're like, it feels like a different read once you've had the experiences through the lenses by which you've already kind of read the book one time, go through life 3 or 4 years, and then the words start making sense. It goes back to like, I think in society, a lot of times, how like when you're writing, you're not supposed to use cliches because it's just kind of like you get like autopiloted. Like when someone says something that's cliche, you're just like, all right, well, like it doesn't even register anymore because it's such a common like phrase in English that the reader just skims over the cliche without even thinking twice about it. I think a lot of times the cliches don't make sense unless you have the experience behind the cliche. I feel like maybe I've said this before on the pod, but like when you read something like the phrase like in loving memory, like let's say that's a cliche, someone passes and they use that phrase. I never knew what that phrase meant. But this past year, obviously, a close friend of ours died. Michelle passed, and that phrase just jumps out at the page when I see it now. And it's not even just like before I would read it and it would just, obviously I'm not like, I just never experienced what that meant. But then like when I read it now, anytime I open a book and someone dedicates a book and they say in loving memory of so and so, and I see it, I'm like, holy shit, like that's what that means, the feeling that you get when you remember somebody that was dear to you. And so tying this back to what you were talking about with like the Bible and spirituality books, I'm gonna bring this back up the pathway by which we came. Yeah, man, a lot of times these books and these things, they don't make any damn sense until you have an experience that makes them make sense. And then experience can't be transmitted through words, but you can write down the words to remember the experience like much better once you've had the experience. And the Bible probably just has a shit ton of that stuff. I don't know. Did any of that make any sense to you?
Oh, I mean, it made a lot of sense. But I wonder if I might just be taking for granted, like, just the natural base understanding that we already share. It is, I mean, I get goosebumps when you talk about this topic, or when we were touching on this topic. It's easily one of the, handful of things that I would gladly push all of my weight behind in terms of the profundity and the ROI of getting people to realize that point, right? That it was made, that there's knowing and there's knowing, arguably the latter, the true knowing, is what you would call wisdom, right? I don't think there's any way through it other than to still live and to spend more times like, revolutions on, on this earth, spinning around the sun. There's no way. And I think that that is the natural endpoint for humans as we age, to impart that wisdom and just equip people who are coming after us with it, and giving it, and they're just going to use it when they use it. It's just going to become real to them when it's real to them, and that's it. And just kind of like sitting back, I've struggled a lot with this, as you know, as we've like, you know, individually and, you know, as friends, like just consume so much content. It's like, hey, Hack, what podcast are you reading today? Oh, what book do you read? Oh, yeah, wasn't that cool? Eckhart Tolle, that dude's woke, right? Oh, Sadhguru, look at this thing, right? YouTube. Um, and then you have people who you talk to, you're just like, man, how do I, like, this is such great stuff. How do I effectively share this? I mean, they're the masters. I think they are able to like go one level above like pithy cliche catchphrases, right? But we're kind of like, I'm still in the level of like, all I can give you is catchphrases, bro. Like, go, you know, go live, go be well. Um, and I also think back to forget the Bible, forget like all these big things. Like, I think your parents had such a big part to play in that, and I don't know if anyone listening or you yourself had those moments with their parents too, where it's like, oh, that's what my parents were trying to, god damn it, they were right. That, you know, I think there's a Mark Twain quote where it's like, um you know, I was cool with my dad, whatever, you know, I thought he was you know, kind of dumb in some ways. And after I went to college, came back, I was surprised at how much smarter he got, like, or something like that. I don't know, paraphrase, like. But where I want to jump to next on this with the parents and the words and things that you carry, the understanding that you carry, wisdom, knowledge, is that the idea of conscience, right? And I think maybe you could make an argument, because I've kind of already touched on God. I've used that word already in this conversation, that like that your conscience, like your little moral bearing inside, somewhat maps to God, right? As this thing, or the subconscious, this part of you that's always watching, right? And like, if you do something in misalignment to your conscience, you feel it. Like, I'm not trying to be like hippy dippy when I say that. Like, you do something that violates a value or principle, you feel it physiologically, right? You feel a little sick, a little bit shifted. And what creates that conscience, right? Like, I think we talk about ego. Is it the same thing? I don't know, right? Like, kind of riffing live here. How does someone's conscience come to be? How do they kind of honor it? What does it look like when they continue to grow hand in hand with their conscience? And I think for me in particular, a lot of my conscience is like the voice of my parents, like coming through, like wanting to do right, with a conscience that like I kind of developed growing up under them, right? Making them proud, like not doing things that would like, make my mom cry or anything. And I'm gonna park this one. I don't want to jump into this one; it'd be too much of a thing. But whenever I talk about conscience and all this kind of stuff, I always you talk about how when people say marijuana is a gateway drug, I mean, it's absolutely true. Marijuana is absolutely a gateway drug, but not for the reason that you would think. Right? Like, but yeah, take it away, brother.
We should have a podcast on drugs.
I think that would be a good one. Yeah,
that would be a good one. But I don't know how much we want to put out there. On I mean, I don't care. Obviously, I don't have a real job, so. I don't know how to add to the conversation on mapping out with conscious. Or I don't have anything in my head about that right now. Let's see here. What were we just talking? We're talking about the Bible. We're talking about our parents. We're talking about, God damn it, our parents were right. I could keep going down this rabbit hole, but I'm not sure if that's.
Let's keep going down that one, because you're the one who brought up the knowing versus knowing. You're the one who brought up a specific example of in loving memory, which
Mhm.
I think that's such a beautiful example, honestly. Like when in my head I was kind of like anticipating what examples you would bring up. Like that's not one I expected, and I think it's really beautiful. Um, and so yeah, I think yeah, I could spend a lot of time on knowing versus knowing, and like cliches and stuff. But up to you, brother.
Yeah, I think yeah, you were talking about how like the ROI of imparting just that one thing to people. Like, hey, listen, there's knowing and then there's knowing. The problem is you can't know until you know. So you can't impart that ROI. You can't know until you know. And so you can't impart that ROI until you've experienced it yourself. And then you look back and you're like, oh shit, that's what they were talking about. I mean, that's why the parents thing is um so important, like that's actually a major, like a lot of our friends, or some of our friends perhaps, don't want to have kids. Um, to me, like I'm like, wait, you don't want to have kids? Like okay, so okay, this is my personal experience. Some of the people I'm closest to in my life are my parents. Um, one of the major reasons I want to have kids is because I think like after you have kids, a lot of that like knowings that your parents like have told you throughout your life become like knowings that after you have a kid. Like, I mean, imagine how many knowings become knowings, and throughout the course of even after your parents pass, as your child is growing up, you will have knowings that come out of nowhere that will remind you of your parents because of the shit that they've said to you that have been embedded to you in the time you've known them for the last 30 something years. Even let's say our parents like live till like 90, and they pass or something like that, like 20 years from now, and you have like a 15-year-old like child, and he's acting up the same way you were acting up when you were 15, and you're trying to be like, hey, listen, I'm trying to help you, dude, like A, B, C, and D, whatever, and your kid's like, no, fuck you, dad, like like, and then you are trying to impart this wisdom, but then your kid, because he hasn't experienced it, doesn't understand this wisdom, and then now you are like in the position of your parents experiencing everything they experienced when you were a child, look, and they were like trying to like impart that wisdom, and then now you're trying to do the same thing, but now you understand what the hell they were trying to tell you, and you empathize with the spot that they were in. um I just think that experience is like you're giving that up if you don't have children. And I know not all parents were the best parents. I had a very good experience growing up with my parents. So perhaps some people are like, I don't want to have kids because, like fuck my parents or whatever. Maybe the parents didn't have the awareness around or the wherewithal to do that, to give a positive like childhood experience. But I don't know. I can't imagine giving that up. Like that has to be like one of the experiences that I um will cherish, once it comes time.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, what a great one, man. So what a great tangent. I love that. So our friend Alan, uh, the guy in Austin. I
Mhm.
remember when we first met him. I think he was kind of like all of us around this age, just thinking about kids, especially for himself, who was like living that expat digital nomad life, like
Mhm.
hard and fast, loose, all that kind of stuff, right? And I think he was the first one to say it like this, and I really liked it. He's like, having kids is like back to the drug thing. It's like tripping, but for like for like 20, 30 years straight. Like it's like, it's hey, put this under your tongue. You're just gonna trip forever. Like you're gonna trip every day of your life, like until this ride is over. Uh, and funny other thing I was also thinking, this is more of an amusing side note, by the way, Hack. We've had this conversation a couple of times about kids already, and I think that, and you're right, right? This applies very much to our demographic. Like it applies to people who generally had good childhoods and have like a certain idea around a pre-existing idea around parenting, and are maybe on the fence. I think that there should be a business card that says Hack Dang Millennial Child Choice Consultant. And you just explain to people like having kids in this kind of way. And if they're on the fence, and again, we generally share the same demographic and background, they'll be like, damn, Hack, maybe I should have kids.
So
Because I break whenever we break, by the way, I kind of shit like this back to not have like to, oh man, kids, and then I talk to you and it's like, oh, duh.
damn, I literally do not want to be responsible for imagine I talk to one and having kids and then like their kid comes out and they're like, what the fuck, bro?
Nah, they signed the waiver, bro. Like
Yeah, sign the waiver.
Yeah,
it's like, yeah, you signed
it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. I don't know, man. I'm talking out of my ass right now. I mean, maybe or Lisa, my brother and his wife, maybe they can speak more to that because they do have a direct experience of having kids and stuff like that. And I don't know, maybe when I have kids, it'll be one of those things where I'm like, you know what, like, what the fuck was I thinking? Because I mean, I do like my life the way it is too. And you do lose a certain semblance of control when you're responsible for. I mean, there's a lot that goes into having kids. It's probably not, all like epiphanies and all that stuff that.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I hope people understand too that we're not just two single guys like talking lightly about having kids as an intellectual exercise. But yeah, but that's real though in its own right. Like that's such a real thing, I think. And I think I've talked to a couple parents, I've read like a lot of people would just outright say the same thing. I think like, we talk about video games, and again, I think this is something this is a refrain I hear a lot from people our age. It's just like, man, I used to love video games. Now I got all the money in the world. I got some time. I got the game. I got the setup. I got the big TV, and I can't enjoy video games again. Like oh my God, it just makes me so sad, right? Yet there's a lot of people I've heard who, now that they have kids and they get to like introduce video games to their kids, they are fully back into it. They're like, oh my God, it's so much fun again. Like I'm able to re-experience that and also share it and see what it's like and re-engage. And so yeah, there's some stuff to that. But yeah, I think we're about to call this soon.
Yeah.
Coming up. Yeah.
Yeah, we can call it soon. I know this was a fun one. It was kind of like, we're doing this podcast retro, but then we just started talking about shit and then going down a divergent path around what we're talking about. So the nature of our conversations.
Yeah, for sure. Kids, what a trip. Knowing, not knowing, talking publicly, and what have you. And that's what we're doing. We're talking publicly about all these things.
Can I close on a quick question that I don't want you to spend more than a minute on, or spend as long as you want. But I mean, if you want to close, then
sure.
Because this was a rabbit hole. This might be could have been a tangential thing. So this relates back to the intention of the original, like the whole podcast retro. The question I wanted to ask, I feel like it's a good time to ask it, is how do you feel about the name So What up to this point? Yeah, I just wanted to pose that question because sometimes I feel like the name should be changed to I don't know, but because it's kind of like the hedging. It's like every single time I'm gonna say something, it's like, yeah, but I don't know. Maybe but I don't know.
I'm not super attached to it. I think that I'm not super attached to it. I think it's just one of the things that we wear for a little bit on this journey, just like clothes, you're always updating it to the latest fashion. So yeah, I don't know, but it's funny. Yeah, that's a good one.
It's like,
hey, you signed the waiver.
Yeah,
you signed the waiver.
Yeah, I was just curious what your thoughts were.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I do really like the name So What, because it does I do feel something when I'm like, oh yeah, so what? You know, it forces us to tie things back to the ground at some point. Or it reminds us to, at least. Um, but then sometimes like when we say stuff and I'm like, fuck, I'm definitely not an expert and I don't want to pretend to be one. So then I'm like, okay, but yeah, I don't know. Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I think it just naturally ties with us finding our voice, right? I think that was the theme of this podcast. Like now that it's public a little bit more, now there's a little bit more accountability. Like how do we actually what do we actually say? How do we speak? How do we edit ourselves live? And why, right? I think the why and the so what for this, for me at least, has always been there's infinite good material content, thought leaders, whatever out there. But for our little corner of the universe, right? For people who match up and that things can catch, right, in a certain way. I think really being able to amplify that voice, amplify those types of thoughts and feelings and experiences, right? I think we brought parents up a decent amount of time. Like that's now a thing I would say is like fundamental to this podcast. So I think that ultimately for me, whatever our title is, will tie to, like you said, crystallizing, imparting, and sharing something, but with a big old hedge that yeah, I don't know, but it's your call.
no man, it's your call, bro. Or I guess it's both of our calls.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's end on that.
Alrighty.
All right. Episode 20 in the books.
Yep.